in the 12-step programs. It's one day at a time for a reason, because we don't get to drink for the rest of our lives. When I first came in, that's forever. I can't do it, but I can do it for one day. I can do it for an hour. And in the very beginning, it was a minute at a time. So for those of you who are struggling with anything, whether it's drugs, alcohol, shopping, sex, it doesn't matter. These principles that Anthony and I are talking about will work for anyone who wants to work them. I happen to include it in a book and distilled it down into 5 simple steps that are basically a rubric for life, a rubric for solving any problems, a rubric for building self-confidence, a rubric for changing your mental habits. The 5 simple, basic, essential habits. You can put any moniker you want on there. I don't trademark this. This is a tool and a design for living that anybody who wants to go figure it out on their own can do so.
Shawn Langwell, welcome back to the show. Brother, I am so glad to have you on the show. I love when you're on.
Oh, I love that you're having me back. I must have done something right for you to be able to invite me back. I appreciate it.
You know, your book, 10 Seconds of Boldness, really does change lives. It has been one of my top books I have read in my entire life. I mean, I read a lot of books. You guys know how many books I read. I love your book. I've got it now on an audio book. I have your book everywhere. I just got back from Spain, and it was in my ear the entire time. It just brought me such joy and comfort. Your wisdom, the way you wrote the book. You know, a lot of authors to me bore me, and they really have like 1 or 2 good chapters, but your book brings in your knowledge. We also bring in knowledge from other technologies that you've used. And it's just such a bold, exciting book, the way you wrote it. Great job.
I appreciate it. And it's a lonely job being an author, because you don't always get feedback from your readers or listeners. So that means the world to me. And, we talked about it briefly before we got on the air, but believe it or not, anybody listening in, the imposter syndrome is live and well, regardless of who you are and where your station of life is, whether you're a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation or an author who's publishing his own books and spending thousands of dollars to do a podcast. We'll get into that a little bit later, because everything I wrote about in this book, I got tested time and time again. So you know what? The benefit of that is we get to live it. And that's what growth-minded people do, is when they are paying attention to how to get better, they continue to get better. They don't just grovel and roll over like a puppy and wet on themselves. So
Well, you know, it's really, really great because as we look at the mind, and you know, for me, it's always about finding the technology. First of all, realizing that we're malleable. Like there was no
mhm.
way I had to be, and there were times in my life that I did not know that the way I lived my life caused the life I was living. Like I didn't have a relationship that it was because, you know, I grew up in Pompano Beach, Florida. My mother was poor. She worked at Denny's. It was because I was an Italian kid. I looked different. It was because I had curly hair. I had all these reasons why my life was what it had nothing to do with anything I was doing. It was like I had no attachment to the life that I was living was being caused by the way that I was living. I had no idea that I could influence or change any of that.
And you know what's interesting? I mean, I spent a lot of time in the book uh, talking about that. And, in terms of background, where I got a lot of that, it came from, being in recovery and having that design, or that framework, if you will, of how to get through those mental tough spots. But unlike some people, I had supportive parents until my dad took off at 12. And then it was like, oh, I'm the oldest of 3 kids. I got to step it up and be the quote unquote man of the house. But in terms of guidelines and how to do different things or deal with the challenges that come with life, you kind of learn it by trial by fire, and you figure it out as you go along. And that's really what I try to encompass in this book, not just from my own experience, Anthony, but pulling from, a pretty much world renowned neuroscientist who's done talks for, without even looking at his notes. You can do it with this PowerPoint behind him and give the whole half an hour talk verbatim to Fortune 500 companies. I mean, Stephen Campbell is a dynamite dude with that. Steve Lavin, who is a broadcaster, an NCAA coach. He took UCLA to the Elite Eight. Aaron Locks, I just went to the Giants game this last weekend and hung out with him. He's a CEO for the last 40 years of a camp company that teaches confidence building skills for kids, and he's helped almost 500,000 kids worldwide. So the book isn't all about me. I integrate all these different stories, and that's what I think you talked about, the holisticness or this integrative and this collaborative process, we learn when we show up and we're humble enough to ask for help and we listen to other people and we follow their guide. I think that's what you're getting at.
Well, but both of us are in a 12-step program, and there is some gift to that. For a lot of my life, I did not realize that just some of my addictions to things were it was Groundhog Day, right? I would get
Mm-hmm.
up and I would just chase those behaviors, and whatever addiction it was, and it literally could be drinking, drugs, sex, money, fear. I mean, there's lots of addictions I've had throughout my life that I've worked on, and in 12-step programs, a lot of times they talk about the spiritual experience, and I'm always looking for like this magical God, like some George Burns guy that's up in the air that's going to say, okay, here you go. And I want this sense of this elf that will come and magically wave all these things away, and I've never had that sense. Like I never really have a connection to the elf, and others do, and God bless them, and I love them, and I love that. But more what I get a sense for is, as I've done the work through those 12-step programs, to start to unwind or unhook myself from the addiction of the behaviors, that what ends up happening is it frees me up to have other possibilities. And
Yes.
really those possibilities become what I call my spiritual experience, is that once I start to stop living the Groundhog Day of addiction, and I start to look at the characteristics and the character, uh, defects you may call them, or character issues that I have, and I look at those and I start to work on those, and it doesn't happen overnight. I start to unhook, possibility happens, right? And that feels like what your book does for me. It really gives me this chance of a playground to look at the things that I'm hooked to, and then how can I start to work on those and start to create a possibility, which is a whole nother life that I can live.
Well, there's that in we both have shared in that by being in 12-step recovery programs, but when we let go of our attachment to those things, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, money, selfishness, self-centered, whatever it is, when we remove that, part of the fear that I talk about a lot in here is that's comfortable. And we all know there's probably however many thousands of people are listening to this, we all have our little comfort zone. So whatever that is, it doesn't have to be some kind of an addiction or a bad habit or a quote unquote sin, but there's things that we have become comfortable with that, and even if we're successful, can become complacent about because we don't have that edge. We don't want to keep thriving forward or striving to move forward. And what happens is we kind of just be like that frog in a pot that's slowly boiling, and we need to get that fire going. It doesn't mean we have to be running through the forest naked with beating on our chest, but it just means that we have to have something to be excited about. And once we let go of our attachment to that, that's an unknown. And that's where a lot of the fear and this imposter syndrome and all this other stuff happens is what are we going to do, especially for an addict like me? What are we going to replace that with? Some people have a real strong, well defined sense of spirituality, whatever that means for you. If you have it, if you don't, that's cool too. But for me, it's a driving force that comes down to a real simple concept. It's called just surrender. It's letting go that I do not have to be in control of every single thing or think that I can be in control of every single thing. Because at the end of the day, I'm not. And most of your listeners aren't either. They like to think they are. But if you get down to brass tacks, these self made people are not necessarily self made. There's hundreds of other people that help support that happen. So, how do we move from this state here into being in a space where we are confident enough to move forward? It comes back to believing in ourselves and having a reason why. And we can talk further about how that works. I don't want to go too deep into it, but for me, it's a simple concept of a higher power that on a daily basis, I just turn it over. I do my very best, which everybody can relate to. That's all we can do is our very best on a daily basis. And the key integral part of all this, whether in recovery or business or writing books, is do our best and let go of the results. And what that means for me is letting it go up to the universe and allowing that space of others to speak into us or the serendipities of life to actually happen without us trying to control the outcome.
That's the hard one, right? Because I get so addicted to control, right? I want things my way. In fact, I'm a king baby sometimes. I have this, you know, I have a way of seeing something one way, and I will do everything I can possibly do to get the outcome I want. I'm a little bit, I'm a lot bit manipulative. I can get to the point where, look, I want it my way. I want it my way now, and and some of that stuff gets exhausting, right? It can be really, really exhausting to live life that way. Now, I'm not going to say that, um, as I develop and work on things, because I think in order to make changes, I'm currently working on sugar, right? Like I never
Hmm.
realized I was dieting and I could never quite lose the weight that I was having a problem with, right? And over the last, last year, I've had this yo-yo effect with my dieting. I would do good. I'd work out. I mean, I'd work out so hard that my legs were going to fall off, right? I mean, just, and then my weight would come back and I'd work out. And I started looking at some of the stuff was I didn't realize how addicted to sugars I was. So I would do all this great work, and then all of a sudden I would screw it all up with the way that I was eating. And I didn't realize at 55. So a doctor finally said to me, "It's less about the workout you're doing; it's more about the food you're putting in your mouth." And I
Hmm.
just couldn't figure out why I couldn't stop myself from. I'd be sitting on the couch at night, and I'd go, "All right, just go to bed." And I all of a sudden I'd be no. I'd go swoop by the kitchen and I knocked down 500 calories or 700 calories. And I wouldn't even blinking, right? Like it was an unconscious move. And it started to remind me of the feeling I had when I was drinking, right? When I would have those nights when I would say, on Sunday night, this week, I'm not going to drink. And all of a sudden, Monday night, I'd be drinking again. I had that same sensation with the food. And it was a very powerless feeling of it. But, as I started to look, it took me a while to notice it. Like at first it was noticing, I would keep doing it and I kept doing it. And now it's been a couple of months of really, really doing well with staying away from sugars and carbohydrates to turn into sugars. And I'm noticing that the more I get away from it, just like the drinking, once I got it far enough away from the drinking, like I have no desire to drink anymore or do any drugs. Like once I get away from it, the hook was out. Now I don't have that same driver. I'm not powerless over it today like I was then. And I feel like the same thing's starting to happen with sugar, but it's taken some work. It's not something that it just happened. It took an awareness. I had to get aware of it. Then I had to start noticing when it was happening. And then I had to start noticing, all right, what am I going to do to replace those behavior? Like, all right, how am I going to eat? I had to figure out some diets that are going to work. And
Sure.
how's it going to, how I was going to figure that out. So your book guided me through that. It really helped me to see, okay, I can't just say I'm not going to eat those things. I got to replace it with something different.
And that, the other part of that too, and I didn't go too deep into it on the food side, Anthony, because I, I basically, I'm fortunate I have a super high metabolism. I always have. I put on 35 pounds since I got married. I used to be, a buck 35 wet, and then I was 155 for a while, and now I'm hovering just below two, around 185, 190. But Father's Day, you know, I love my donuts. My wife and I are early risers, and we went, and our favorite donut shop was closed because they went out of town. And I'm like, Sunrise Donuts ain't happening. I'm like, I was determined. It's become a tradition. It's become a tradition. I told my wife, I said, I only need like one or two because if you go get a dozen, I'm going to be out for the count. And for me, I don't eat a whole lot of sugar on a regular basis. I try not to. It's not something I obsess about. But if it's there, just like an alcohol addiction, if it's there, I'm going to eat it. And that box of donuts was like calling my name. I get it every single time I walk by. So Father's Day Sunday from 6 o'clock in the morning until the following day, I must have eaten like 6 or 7 donuts, and I felt like shit the next day. It took me. I felt like I was coming over from a sugar hangover, and I haven't felt that way in a while. And I knew the mental. I don't want to say it. The mental masturbation of food addiction or any addiction is just insane, and that's a big part of it. The other part is a physical allergy. I have a choice. I didn't have to stuff 10 of them in my face over 2 days. I'd save some for the kids, but you know what? I paid attention to how I felt. I paid attention to how miserable I felt and wanted to curl up in a little ball. And I'm like, I don't need to do this. I can have one or two, but I don't need to obsess about that box of donuts. So, you know, Forrest Gump said life is like a box of chocolates. Well, I don't know what that has to do with anything here, but for me, the challenges of eating a box of donuts on Father's Day, it ain't worth it to me. So, but the point, the replacement, doing other things for those habits that we normally reach for, whatever that is. And none of us are perfect. I'm not here to try and, you know, point out anybody's character defects. You've got a long list of your own you can look at, and it's up to you, as I said in the book, to figure out what those are and which ones are causing you pain. And the ones that are causing enough pain, we're going to probably want to do something about. And without being a 12-step book, a lot of these mental, physical, spiritual, relational types of issues that we face as human beings I touch on them interspersed throughout the book because it's just what I've learned over the last 3 to 4 decades of being in recovery and in business. And it's kind of a self-awareness exercise for myself that I've had to live through. And we'll get to that in a little second. But the sugar thing, I get it. It just,
It was such a physical, it was very similar to smoking. You know, cigarettes were another one of those ones I had a tough time quitting, and it would be amazing. Like I would say to myself, like every time I put those cigarettes down, I believed the last time, the last cigarette I smoked, the last time I ingested nicotine, I was like, okay, that's it, I'm done. But what would happen is my brain, and they talk about that cunning, baffling, and powerful, right, in addiction, and my brain would somehow or another come up with some BS story that would say to me, just take a puff. Okay, just I know you're a little edgy, and look, you could just take a puff. And then I'd light a cigarette. I'm like, I'm just gonna take a puff. Like, okay, oh my god, this feels so good. And then I'm like, well, I'll just finish the cigarette. And then I'm like, oh, I get to the end of the cigarette. I'm like, okay, no, okay. And then all of a sudden, I get the efforts. I'll quit tomorrow. And that was something that was very similar to the other addictions that I've been able to cut, right? My brain, as it goes to disconnect from whatever it's getting some pleasure out of. And again, it's all those things we've talked about. And I start to look at making the changes. The changes don't happen overnight. Addiction didn't start overnight. And at least my sensation is I've never had that feeling where I could just stop. There's other people, well, I stopped smoking cigarettes. I never turned back around. I never had, great. For me, it didn't happen that way. It happened where I stopped. I said I was going to stop, and then I would keep going. Then I said I'm going to stop again. I'd keep going. Just like the sugar, same thing happened where I would say I'm going to do it, and then well, and then what happened was funny about my brain is it gets this like amnesia, right? Like it starts to pretend like there's
selective
you
forgetter.
forgot that there's
Yeah.
yeah, it's a built-in forgetter, which like all of a sudden like, well, it's just chocolate, well, milk. Oh no, there's sugar in that. Or oh, it's something. Oh, it's salad dressing. Oh, I know there's sugars in salad dressings. I got to pay attention, right?
Yeah.
And when I'm above the line, when I stay conscious, and I work really hard on it, like now I'm really far away from the sugar addiction. I can slow down, and I can just notice. I'll read the labels. I'll take a look at what's in them. I'll stick to standard stuff like just olive oil and lemon, right? I could just do a little olive oil, lemon, and salt, and it makes the most wonderful salads. My taste buds come alive with that. I actually today, the further away from sugars I get, the less the flavors of them. I was in Spain, just we were just talking about being in Spain, and they have those little. Actually, I went to Portugal from Spain, and we went over to Portugal, and they have those little custard snacks. And I said, I'm going to have one. I told myself I'm going to have one when I'm in Portugal. And what was funny about it was just taking a bite into that, I could feel the sugar again. And
Mm.
it just didn't feel like it did when it was, I was in Portugal the year before and I ate dozens of those things. And this time it felt actually bad. Like it's the same thing happened with smoking. Like today, when I smell cigarette smoke, I used to love the smell of cigarette smoke. Today it makes me nauseous.
Yeah.
Once my body's off the addiction, it knows what's going to kill me. At least for me, I don't know if everybody else has that sensation, but for me, once I get off the hook, and I'm not hooked in there anymore. My brain has the ability to see that okay, that's going to hurt me, and it wants me to do better.
What's interesting too, Anthony, is that a lot of people struggle with the discipline once they know what needs to be done, and it can be something that they really want to stop, whether it's overspending, shopping, spending money you don't have, sugar. I mean, you could, the laundry list is as long as we want to make it. But the challenge is the mental part of not beating ourselves up. And it's different for us with addiction because it is 100% abstinence. And I don't know how it works for food or other things because it's not, I don't have that and I can't speak to it. I can only speak from my own experience. But part of part of the addiction is the mental obsession about this stuff, and it can spill over into feelings and negative self-talk and all these other things that I touch on in 10 seconds of boldness, because it's about building a muscle of your brain and a muscle of practice and experience, like you already alluded to, of replacing some of these things and being confident and comfortable that we are not going to die if we change a little bit. And it may seem super hard, but that's why the whole concept of 10 seconds of boldness, because yeah, can we, the challenges that you already talked about, that we all talk about, they were built up over time for long, long days, months, weeks, even years or decades. We cannot expect, where this disconnect happens, is we expect immediate results with just a little bit of effort. And when we don't get there in a day or 2 days or 2 weeks of going to the gym around the beginning of the year, and then we give up because we haven't lost the 25, guess what, folks? It's not how it works. Go ask any professional athlete. I alluded to a few of them here. I don't have the direct relationships, but look at Steph Curry's workout regimen. In the offseason, the dude's practicing 6 hours a day. He doesn't need to. He's an elite athlete. He's in the gym pumping iron. Why? Because he needs to maintain that level of elite athlete, you know, excellence that has earned him 4 NBA championships. I'm not suggesting that we need to compete on that level, but we need to find that happy medium where it's believable for us to get incrementally a little bit better and a little bit better. James Clear talks about it in Atomic Habits. It's habit stacking. It's just doing a little bit better every single day. In the 12-step programs, it's one day at a time for a reason, because we don't get to drink for the rest of our lives. When I first came in, that's forever. I can't do it, but I can do it for one day. I can do it for an hour. And in the very beginning, it was a minute at a time. So for those of you who are struggling with anything, whether it's drugs, alcohol, shopping, sex, it doesn't matter. These principles that Anthony and I are talking about will work for anyone who wants to work them. I happen to include it in a book and distilled it down into 5 simple steps that are basically a rubric for life, a rubric for solving any problems, a rubric for building self-confidence, a rubric for changing your mental habits. The 5 simple, basic, essential habits. You can put any moniker you want on there. I don't trademark this. This is a tool and a design for living that anybody who wants to go figure it out on their own can do so. They're so simple. They may be easy for some, others it's going to be incredibly challenging. They're identify a problem or an opportunity, clearly know what the heck you want, know why you want it, what drives you, what motivates you, what gets you off the couch and into the gym, what gets you out on the treadmill, what gets you to go do those things that are uncomfortable. And the other 2, we live and breathe every single day because we're all strategy driven individuals, but we forget about the why in the middle and the first 2 parts. We're all hung up about wanting to do strategies. Well, the strategy part is have a plan, and the 5th one is work that plan. See, the problem with most people today is they want this quick fix solution that's like, Tinkerbell coming along to sprinkle pixie dust on us. And guess what, folks? It ain't done not work that way. It's about following a process and discipline over time. So the strategy, in the book, in the genre that I choose to be in the self-help environment, in particular, personal development books, self-improvement, growth, inspiration, motivation, there's a preponderance of everybody who's hung up on strategy. Strategy, anybody in the world can come up with a new strategy. Anybody can come up with new skills. What I'm talking about are the internal components that drive us as human beings, that are the core of who we are as human beings and what really drives us. And that comes down to the why. It comes down to clearly knowing what the heck we want because we're uncomfortable with it, and understanding the problem. The strategy will be forever fluid. And it needs to be forever fluid, because if we're not adapting and changing throughout the course of our lives, guess what? We're going to be a couch potato, we'll weigh 5,000 pounds, and we won't be able to get up and grab the remote. That's an over exaggeration. It's not meant to be mean to anybody, But some of us need to find that reason to get up off the couch and put down the remote and the Ben and Jerry's and go out there and do something with our lives. And that's incredibly scary. You know, you're giving me an opportunity right here, right now, and some of the feedback you've given. The imposter syndrome I felt, you guys, and I'm going to be totally frank with you for a second, and it might be hard for some of you to understand. But I wrote this book over 5 years. I put it down because I didn't think I was qualified to do it because I wanted it to be about goal setting and I wasn't hitting my goals at work. The concept of 10 seconds of boldness came as a result of me getting sick and tired of 3 decades of doing this and feeling like I couldn't. And I wrote a post-it note and put it above my phone on my desk and said, 10 seconds of boldness. And from there, all during the pandemic, you guys, my sales were the best I've ever had my entire career. When everything else was going to hell in a handbasket, my sales went up 22% year over year. And in 1 month, I hit 58% increase in sales just from changing this mindset. Now, fast forward to January of this year when all the health craze and all this stuff is happening. And I wanted to come out with an audiobook, and I had never done this before. And I made a commitment to spend some serious coin and go into a studio, which I'd never done before, to talk about things like imposter syndrome, doubt, insecurity, fear, all of this stuff. And I'm in there working with some seasoned producers and engineers, and also a former editor. And I had to face the music. The first 2 chapters I recorded sucked. They were horrible. And I almost threw in the towel. And it had a little come to Jesus meeting with the producers, and he says, "You need to rehearse." Did you rehearse? I said, "No," because you know what? I'm going to be blunt. A lot of things in my life have come easy, but I don't have to rehearse. That's called a fixed mindset. If you don't know what that means, read Carol Dweck's book, Fixed Mindset versus Growth Mindset. Fixed mindset people do not succeed long term. They're the CEOs, like you name them, that get pushed out the door. The growth mindset folks are the ones that are going to rule the world over the next 10 to 100 years. So what they did in that moment was tell me I needed to practice. And they said, not once, not twice. We want you to come in there ready to rock and roll, lay down the tracks, and move forward. So when you go get the audiobook, and it's only $20 on Amazon, and you listen to it as Anthony has over the last couple, 3 weeks, I hope what transfers there is not only the information, but there's a narrative arc of my own struggles in the beginning, if you listen closely, to an ending that comes to something that I'm not going to spoil. But there's a natural narrative arc to the book, to my voice, to the stories I tell, and to your life. If you seize the brass ring and you decide that I have to have 10 seconds of boldness and go out there and make something for myself, that's what I'm all about. I believe in whoever you are. And you know what? I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because Anthony's giving me opportunities and so many other people are too. And I have to remember to step into it even when I don't know what's going to happen. So that's what I'm all about, Anthony.
It's amazing, Shawn. Yeah, what I love, this audience is what you got to get. Like even the coaches of coaches, right? Shawn, coaches of coaches, the book writer. Look, we all go through it. I don't care where you are in the spectrum. That imposter syndrome comes up. Shawn, when you were reading the book, and you were doing the audible, how cathartic was that for you to go back through the writing when you were writing it? As you were reading the book out loud, how was that to go through?
I'm glad you're asking that question. There was a couple points because it was emotional because I'm like you. I'm a perfectionist. I pretend I'm not, but I want everything what I want. I don't want to make mistakes. And I'm like, I literally, quite honestly, I got pissed off a couple times. I wanted to cuss him out, and that was healthy. But as I pushed through, I started to get that glimmer, just like when you're teaching a kid to ride a bike or swim for the first time, that joy when they finally are able to do it on their own. I was doing it and I was like, holy crap, I'm actually doing this. And then when I got to some of the stories there, that I'm literally reading sections in this book about um, how confidence is really, it's a byproduct. It's not something that you do. It's a function of doing other things. There were multiple times moving forward in the project where not only the director but the engineer and producer were literally in tears because I was striking a chord with what they were saying, and they were picking up on how cathartic it was for me. And when I tell the story about about having an opportunity to forgive my father, because in my heart of hearts, I've done everything I have up to this point in my life to try and be the man that I thought my father should have been for me. I've worked my ass off. I've done everything for this outward expectation of a reward instead of taking care of the number one guy right here who has the ability to do that with a higher power who I choose to call God. And I lost sight of that for the last 4 decades. I was sitting here figuring it out. And when I finally came to that opportunity to say goodbye to my father, it is a moment I will never, ever forget for the rest of my life. And I'm not going to spoil it. You need to get the book and read it, because anybody who is a product of an abandoned family, whether you are in business or not, you need to read this book.
It's an amazing section, right? As I go through that, letting my father off the hook, right? Finally taking that spot where, just realizing what a story I carried on about that, and starting to release that, right? Release him of the story I made up about, what he's supposed to be and what he's supposed to do. And look, at the end of the day, I ended up where I ended up, and he did what he could do with what he was given. And somewhere in here, as I open that those chapters and read through those sections of your book, you really get to start to look at, that's just a big part of my programming, right? Where I've
Yeah.
put in a whole section of my program, and as there's another section there I want to talk about is the t-shirts, right? What shirts you put on, what do you say about yourself on your shirts every day? That's another one of my
Oh,
favorite ones, because there are days when I was trying to lose weight. I'm going to go back to because that's the most current one for me right now. Is I would say to myself, you fat ass, right? I can't believe you're eating that. Maybe I remember there were times when I was willing just to give up and go, maybe I just get comfortable with being fat, right? If I just call myself fat and just be comfortable with it, I was really, when we talk about not giving up 5 seconds before the miracle, and I was about ready to give up. I just felt so helpless. Like I kept bouncing back and forth and back and forth on this weight loss program. And it was a torture. And the names I would call myself were just not friendly, right?
yeah.
I would see myself. I'd go look in the mirror. I just could not see myself other than, the worst parts of myself. I was more, here, by the way, if somebody else talked to me the way I was talking to myself, I'd punch them in the throat.
Well, and that's the funny thing. I mean, I was like, do I want to put this in here? And it's like, no, we need to, because we would never talk to anybody close to us that we love the way we talk to ourselves. This itty bitty shitty committee between our ears, the negative noise up here, it's just, it's horrible. If we did it at a job, we would have been fired the first time we did it. So why do we do it to ourselves? I don't know.
It was torture. Like when I was reading that, I'm like, oh my God, that's the way I talk to myself, and I've got to replace that self talk, right? And then it was just like one thing at a time, right? It became, all right, if I could just make it from now to dinner, and tonight's dinner, just work on a couple simple things for dinner, right? And in the morning, I'd work out. I'd get a really good workout in the morning, and that felt good, right? So I was doing an esteemable act, right? So I'd get a little bit of confidence from doing something good in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and then I would listen to your audiobook while I was getting dressed, and that would give me a little bit more fodder for thought, and it got me set to walk into my day, with some positive thinking. And maybe I would knock off having a healthy breakfast, right? So I got rid of the breads. I just went to the proteins, and I kind of found a way to, like you talked about in the book, finding a replacement for those behaviors. All right. So what's the behavior I want to replace? All right. I got to find a breakfast that I can eat that is going to make me sustainable to lunch. And then at lunch, if I could go to, find some way of having, there's a taco place down the street. If I got rid of going to tacos and I went to a bowl, and I could have just the vegetables and the proteins that were in there, and it was no carbs and no sugars, I'm like, that's fantastic, right? It was just little steps that your book guides me to that really inspires me. And it's not like it's stuff that but just I need that book was such a great guide. And that the audible part of the book, every morning I can listen to a portion of that, a chapter while I'm shaving, that puts something good in my brain for the day that I can take and apply to the day that I'm going to live.
And did you feel better when you not just listened to the book, but after you made some of those corrections and changes to your routines and habits? How'd you feel?
Look, it's been amazing. It's been this amazing journey. I was in my doctor's office today. I went for a health checkup. My blood pressure. She's like, "Oh my god." She goes, "What did you do?" So she had given. I was getting ready to go on Ozempic, right? I was getting ready to take on, which is essentially a way of losing weight. The shot you give yourself, but you're kind of stuck. Once you take that, you're kind of stuck taking that for life, right? And they give it to people with diabetes. And I had talked her into, because I was at a point where I couldn't lose the weight. And I was so
Mm-hmm.
frustrated with myself. And I talked her into a couple of months ago going, can I take that Ozempic? I just want, by the way, I wanted an easier, softer way, right? When you were talking
Sure.
about before, I didn't want to do the work. I didn't want to do the work. I didn't want to, I was tired of fighting it. I couldn't get it. I thought, maybe if I take this shot, I'll be able to lose weight. And I said, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to listen to Shawn's book, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to work really hard on it. Look, and it wasn't really hard. What I said was, I'm just going to stay focused for the day. First of all, I didn't make it hard. I made it easy, and I said, all I got to do is break this down between now and dinner. If I can make it now to dinner, or from now to breakfast, from breakfast to lunch, from lunch to and I started making those little jumps. I'm not going to tell you I was always perfect.
Sure.
There's times where all of a sudden I'd have something in my mouth. I'm like, you went unconscious, didn't you? Like, it was funny how fast that happens. With addictions, I got to stay so vigilant because I can get a little unconscious quick. Like especially when I'm hungry, angry, lonely, tired.
Yep.
Right when those places, or I come home from work and maybe I had a salad for lunch, and sometimes it didn't feel so fulfilling. I realized I need a little bit more protein. I couldn't just eat lettuce. It wasn't gonna. I needed more protein, so I now would ask for a double salmon. Right, I'd go to this restaurant down the street. I'd have a salmon salad, and I would ask for double salmon. And great, now that held
Yeah.
me all the way through dinner, and I wouldn't need the snack. So it started to replace, and those little tiny wins gave me a little bit more confidence. And and here, by the way, I'm not there yet. I haven't gotten anywhere yet. I'm just 12 pounds down from where I was, and it's been a pretty steady, stable run. I just went to vacation, and normally that's a 15-pound gain, and I came back net loss. And
That's awesome.
that's like a 20-pound win right there, right? Like, because I would have, on vacations, I just pastries and cookies, and every place you go to, you got to try that stuff, right?
Right.
When you're an addict, those are all excuses to get away with behaviors that you're on vacation. Of course, you should.
But the other important thing there too, Anthony, is that and I allude to this, is to not be so, to give ourselves some grace. It depends on what the nature of whatever it is that we're trying to do, but we're not going to be doing things perfect all the time ever. And to allow, because that's where a lot of the negative stuff, it just, you and I both know this. If you slip in whatever form, we go back to how it was and we automatically throw everything out. And understanding that there's this natural ebb and flow is the grace part with ourselves or with whomever. The other part is remembering to have some kind of a reward in there. And it doesn't have to be, starve ourselves to death and then let's go binge on chocolate, triple layered chocolate cake. But there can be other healthy rewards that are, I do it all the time with my work. I, I'm a high strung, high stress individual that goes. For me to operate on this level, I got to have at least 30 minutes of downtime, whether it's meditation or a nap every day. So I'll bust my butt knowing that at the end of that, I can have a meal, I can recharge for 30 to 45 minutes on my lunch hour, and then I come back and I can keep going. So that's my reward. That's my reward system. The flip side of that is becoming so tight that we got to get it all right. And if we don't, then all hell's going to break loose. And that's the other side of the grace of letting go of our control. So it's just interesting how we're wired as humans. And I think, in the grand scheme of things, most people are really good people. And what we need to do is learn to lighten up on ourselves a little bit and just be the best people that we can possibly be, because, life's short and it's way too short to be uptight all the time, which I still am to a certain degree. And that's why, I'm writing these books, because I learned a long time ago when I was in my first 12-step recovery meeting that the best cure for my own aches and pains and mental and physical and emotional problems is to get out of my own head and be of service to others. So anything and everything that I do from this point forward with my in my life is real simple. It's about being of service to other people, whatever manifestation that takes. And I think that's what you're doing here on this podcast with pulling together people from all walks of life, all businesses, giving me a second opportunity here. I'm incredibly grateful for this. I seriously am. Um, I fought through my own imposter syndrome to get here because I'm like, future factory, big business, construction. What do I know about any of that? Nothing, but you know what? You and I both know that we are all human beings trying to go rowing in the same direction of life. And we all have families, we all have emotions, we all have feelings, we all have aches and pains and all that. And in that sense, that is a common thread that combines to make us all the same. In our own way, we have more in common than anybody else will ever totally realize. And that's what I speak to when I get an opportunity to get out here and write about it, talk about it, teach about it, coach about it, whatever it is. So thank you, my friend. Seriously.
Shawn, 10 Seconds of Boldness is a amazing book. Audience, if you guys please take a second and go to Amazon right now. It's got it on audio book. It's on all the streaming services. Download it, get it. It's $20. It's a gift to you. Listen. You guys know how many books I read. I read a lot of books. I read a book every week. This is one of the ones that's top of my list. It's on my playlist. I travel with it. It's a great book. Shawn, you've done an amazing job with the way you wrote the book, the way it's put together, the other authors and technologies you brought into the book. It is a bold, a brave book to have written, and I am so grateful to have you in my group of friends. And book that the work that you did here is notable and worthy of listening to. So, audience, please take a second right now and go over. We'll put a link in the comment section down below for you to go and click on that for Amazon and get a copy of this book today and enjoy it like I do. Shawn, I'm grateful for you and all the work that you do. Thanks for being on the show again.
Thank you for having me, Anthony. And anytime, this is a privilege and an honor. And try and keep my ego in check and just try and be the best I can and serve other people. And if we can help one or two people by this podcast, then you know what? Your and my work is done for the day.
That's awesome. Thank you, brother.
All
I'm
right.
grateful on there. And audience, as always, thanks for listening. Take a second, like and subscribe. It means the world to Shawn and I. If you could take a second, do that now. I would be grateful. And please, please, please hit the bell next to it so you get every week's podcast come out. Thanks again for being on the show.